What happens when a saint is forced to watch boys he loves fall into hell one by one? Does God show mercy even when the screaming starts? And can a single night in 1868 change how we understand the invisible war for souls happening right now? Throughout the 19th century, Turin was drowning in abandoned children. The Industrial Revolution had pulled families from farms into factories, and thousands of boys ended up on the Arma, streets without fathers or futures. They stole bread. They slept in doorways. By age 15, many were already in prison cells waiting for nothing. Into this wreckage walked a priest named Giovanni Melchiorre Bosco. Don Bosco, as everyone called him, built his life on one mission: save the young. He opened homes, he taught trades, he heard confessions for hours until his knees bled. But there was something else people whispered about. Don Bosco saw things. He knew when a boy was hiding mortal sin. He predicted deaths down to the day and hour. His dreams were not dreams, they were windows. On the night of April 17, 1868, Don Bosco tried everything to avoid sleeping. He sat at his desk, flipping through books until midnight. He propped his pillow upright against the headboard and sat, like a man waiting for an execution. He had been visited 3 nights in a row, and each time he woke more exhausted than if he had worked through darkness. But exhaustion won. He fell asleep. The figure appeared instantly, dressed in white light, standing next to the bed. Not a suggestion, not a shadow, solid, real. The voice was calm but absolute. "Get up and follow me," Don Bosco protested. "For heaven's sake, leave me alone. I'm exhausted. I have been tormented by a toothache for several days, and I need rest." The figure did not move. The voice repeated, "Get up. Follow me." Don Bosco stood. If you value documented Catholic saint history and spiritual visions like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. The script is researched and factual using sources from the biographical memoirs of Saint John Bosco Volume 9, compiled by the Salesian Congregation, and from the full transcript Don Bosco himself wrote and delivered to his students on May 3, 1868, which was documented by Father Joseph Pius Martin and preserved in the Salesian archives of the Basilica of Mary Help of Christians in Turin, Italy. Now back to the information. The guide led Don Bosco out into a vast plain, desert, lifeless, no trees, no water, just yellowed, dried vegetation stretching endlessly in every direction. The air felt dead. Don Bosco wanted to turn back, but the figure kept walking and he followed in silence. After what felt like hours, a road appeared ahead, beautiful, wide, paved smooth as glass. Both sides were lined with green hedges, bursting with roses and flowers. The path looked inviting, easy, safe. They took the road. Don Bosco felt himself moving faster than his feet could explain. The road sloped downward, but so gently he barely noticed. It felt like wind was carrying him. He looked behind and saw his boys, hundreds of them, boys from the oratory, boys he knew by name. They were walking the same road, smiling, talking, unaware. Then one of them fell. Not tripped. Fell backward violently, like something yanked his legs out from under him. The boy hit the ground hard, and before he could stand, an invisible force dragged him off the road toward a distant cliff that dropped into darkness. Another boy fell, then another. Don Bosco watched them slide away screaming. "What makes these boys fall?" he asked the guide. "Take a closer look," the figure said. Don Bosco crouched and stared at the ground. Traps, everywhere, thin as spider silk, nearly invisible, some at ground level, others strung at head height. The boys were walking straight into them without seeing a thing. The moment a trap caught them, they were yanked down and pulled toward the abyss. Don Bosco grabbed one of the thin cords and tugged. It did not break. He pulled harder. Instead of pulling the trap toward him, he felt himself being dragged toward the cliff. He stopped resisting and let the cord pull him forward until he reached the mouth of a cave. He stood at the edge. The cave dropped straight down into blackness. He pulled the cord again. This time something moved far below. He kept pulling. After a long struggle, a massive shape emerged from the darkness. A monster, hideous, enormous, gripping the ends of every trap in clawed hands. This was the thing dragging boys into hell, the devil himself holding every cord. Don Bosco stepped back and studied the traps more carefully. Each one had a label burned into the thin cord: pride, disobedience, envy, sixth commandment, theft, gluttony, sloth, anger. He walked among them, watching which traps caught the most boys. He started counting, keeping mental notes of the patterns. 3 sins dominated everything else: impurity, disobedience, pride. These 3 were linked together like a chain. The trap of impurity was often connected directly to the trap of pride. Once a boy was caught by one, the others followed fast. A boy caught in pride would fall into disobedience within steps. A boy trapped by impurity would be dragged into both pride and disobedience before he could even try to stand. The pattern repeated over and over. Different boys, same sequence, same result. But there were other objects scattered among the traps: knives, swords, hammers. These were different. They did not pull anyone down. Someone had placed them there deliberately, carefully, strategically. Don Bosco picked one up. The blade was sharp and real. It had an inscription etched along the steel. Meditation. Another knife nearby read, Spiritual reading well made. 2 long swords were labeled Devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and Frequent Holy Communion. A third sword said Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. There were smaller knives for devotion to Saint Joseph, Saint Aloysius, and other saints. A heavy hammer sat near one of the larger traps. Its handle was marked Confession. Don Bosco watched closely. The boys who saw these tools and grabbed them were able to cut the cords. They sliced through the traps and kept walking up the road away from the cliff. But most boys never looked down. They were too focused on the path ahead, too distracted by each other, too confident they would not fall. They walked right past the weapons and straight into the traps. The ones who ignored them kept falling. The guide turned and kept walking. The road grew steeper. The flowers disappeared. The smooth pavement turned rough. Stones, pebbles, holes. The slope became so sharp, Don Bosco had to brace himself to keep from running. The boys behind him were stumbling faster now, dragged by something invisible. Some were sprinting headlong toward the drop. Why such haste? Don Bosco asked. Because they are dragged by the snare of human respect, the guide said. The fear of what others think. That pulled them faster than anything else. At the bottom of the slope, an enormous building rose out of the ground. Walls higher than mountains. Bronze portals sealed tight. Green smoke poured from behind the walls, lit by flashes of scarlet flame. The heat was suffocating. Don Bosco could barely breathe. He looked up at the first portal. Words were carved into the bronze. The place of no reprieve. They were standing at the gates of hell. The guide walked Don Bosco around the perimeter. The building stretched endlessly in both directions. Every few hundred feet, another bronze portal loomed over another steep descent. Each door had an inscription carved deep into the metal. The first read, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. The second said, Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. A third proclaimed, Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity. Another warned, The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. Don Bosco pulled out his notebook to copy them down. His hands were shaking. The guide reached out and stopped him. There is no need. You have them all in Holy Scripture. You even have some of them inscribed in your porticos. Don Bosco realized he had been reading these verses his entire priesthood. He had preached on them. He had taught them to his boys. But standing here at the actual gates, seeing them carved into bronze doors that opened into real fire, changed everything. These were not metaphors. These were not warnings meant to scare children into obedience. These were descriptions of an actual place that existed right now beneath his feet. The heat radiating from the walls was unbearable. Don Bosco's lungs burned with every breath. The green smoke mixed with scarlet flashes created a nauseating light that made his eyes water. He wanted desperately to run back up the slope to the oratory. He started walking. The guide ignored him. Don Bosco wanted to leave. He started walking back toward the oratory, but the guide ignored him. They trudged through a ravine and came back to the base of the first portal. The guide grabbed Don Bosco's arm. Look! Far up the road, a figure was racing down the slope at impossible speed. Hair standing on end, arms thrashing, face twisted in terror. Don Bosco recognized him, one of his boys. The boy's eyes were locked backward over his shoulder like he was running from something hunting him. He crashed into the bronze portal at full speed. The portal exploded open with a roar that shook the ground beneath Don Bosco's feet. Instantly, 1,000 other portals deeper inside the mountain opened in sequence like dominoes falling. Each bronze door was hundreds of feet behind the previous one, creating a corridor that stretched miles into the earth. The sound was deafening, metal scraping against stone, hinges screaming. The echo bounced off walls Don Bosco could not see. Through the open doors, he saw something that made his stomach collapse and his knees buckle. Furnace jaws, massive, glowing, spouting fiery balls that shot through the corridor like bullets. The boy was sucked into the passage and swallowed by flames before he could scream again. Then, as quickly as they opened, the doors slammed shut, one after another starting from the deepest chamber and working back toward the entrance. The sound of each door closing was like thunder. The final portal at the entrance crashed closed with such force the ground shook and dust fell from the cliffs above. Don Bosco tried to write the boy's name. The guide stopped him again. Wait. 3 more boys came tumbling down, screaming, arms outstretched, rolling like stones. Don Bosco recognized all 3. The moment they hit the portal, it burst open again. The 1,000 doors inside opened. The boys were dragged into the fire. The doors closed. At intervals, more boys came, crashing, screaming, vanishing. Don Bosco turned to the guide. Why was that first boy looking backward in terror? Because God's wrath will pierce hell's gates to reach and torment him even in the midst of fire. The guide motioned toward the portal. Come. Don Bosco hesitated. The guide took his hand and led him through the bronze door into a narrow corridor. They moved at lightning speed. Threatening inscriptions glowed on every inner gateway. The last door opened into a vast courtyard. At the far end stood a final entrance covered in shadow. From here on, the guide said, no one may have a helpful companion, a comforting friend, a loving heart, a compassionate glance, or a benevolent word. All that is gone forever. Do you just want to see, or would you rather experience these things yourself? I only want to see, Don Bosco said quickly. They stepped through. The corridor led to an observation platform behind a massive glass wall. The glass was thick, clear, unbreakable. Don Bosco pressed his face against it and looked down into an immense cave sunk deep into the bowels of the mountains. The cave was enormous, larger than any cathedral, larger than any building Don Bosco had ever seen. The entire cave was on fire, but not with normal flames. The fire did not have the orange and yellow colors of earthly fire. It glowed white, bright white, incandescent. The flames did not leap or dance. They simply existed everywhere at once, covering every surface. But strangest of all, the fire did not consume anything. Nothing burned away, nothing turned to ash. The fire simply burned. Forever. The temperature was beyond anything Don Bosco thought possible. Even standing behind the glass, he could feel heat pressing against his skin like physical weight. Sweat poured down his face. His throat felt raw. His lungs struggled with every breath. He wanted to step back, but the guide held his arm firm. A boy dashed out from somewhere in the darkness Don Bosco could not see. The boy's scream was piercing, sharp, high-pitched like metal scraping glass, like someone falling into molten bronze. He plunged into the center of the white fire, and the moment his body touched the flames, he became incandescent, glowing. A human-shaped statue frozen in agony. His mouth was open in mid-scream. His arms were outstretched. His back was arched. But he did not move. He did not fall. He just hung there, suspended in fire. The scream echoed for one more second, bouncing off the cave walls, and then stopped, completely leaving only the sound of the fire itself, which burned in silence. Don Bosco stared. The boy looked familiar. Is not he so and so? He asked the guide. The guide said nothing. Another boy came hurtling down, also from the oratory. Then another. Don Bosco's terror was climbing. When these boys come dashing into this cave, do not they know where they are going? They surely do, the guide said. They have been warned 1,000 times, but they still choose to rush into the fire because they do not detest sin and are loath to forsake it. Furthermore, they despise and reject God's incessant merciful invitations to do penance. Don Bosco kept watching. The boys in the fire were not still. They were savagely striking at each other like rabid dogs, clawing their own faces, tearing their flesh and throwing it, spitting, screaming. Then the ceiling of the cave became transparent as crystal. Through it, Don Bosco could see a patch of heaven, radiant, beautiful. The saints were visible safe for all eternity. The boys in the fire looked up and saw them too. Envy consumed them. They screamed blasphemies, curses. Rage poured out against the saints because they had once ridiculed those same people for being good. The guide gripped Don Bosco's arm. Touch the wall. What? Touch the wall. You must know this is real. Don Bosco reached toward the wall. The heat was unbearable before his hand even made contact. The guide seized his hand, forced it open, and pressed it flat against the stone. The pain was instant, searing, beyond anything Don Bosco had ever felt. He screamed and tried to pull away, but the guide held his hand there for one more second. Then he let go. Don Bosco jerked awake in his bed, gasping, soaked in sweat. He looked at his hand. It was swollen, red, blistered. Over the next several days, the skin peeled off in sheets. The vision was not a dream. On Sunday night, May 3rd, 1868, Don Bosco gathered all his boys in the oratory. He stood on the small rostrum they used for evening talks. His hand was still bandaged. He told them everything. He did not soften it. He did not skip the parts about recognizing them in hell. He told them the traps, the monster, the bronze doors, the screaming, the fire that never stops. Now, when he finished, the room wasn't silent. Call it a dream or whatever you like, Don Bosco said. But I will tell you this for your spiritual profit. Those boys I saw falling are not dead yet. They are still alive. But they are in mortal sin. And if they die in that state, they will end up exactly where I saw them. One boy raised his hand. Father, what can we do to avoid it? Don Bosco's answer was direct. Obey God. Obey the church. Obey your parents and superiors, even in little things. Avoid idleness, because it is the doorway the devil uses. Go to confession frequently and mean it. Receive Holy Communion often. Visit Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. Pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary every day. And above all, flee impurity, disobedience, and pride, because those three are linked, and they drag more souls to hell than anything else. Another boy asked about the ones who did not know where they were going. Why did they still run into the fire? Because the sensual man does not perceive the things that are of God, Don Bosco said. Their minds were darkened by sin. They knew hell existed, but they convinced themselves it would not happen to them. Or they told themselves they would repent later. But later never came. Father One Boy said, his voice shaking, "Is there any hope for someone who has fallen into one of those traps?" "Yes," Don Bosco said. "There is always hope while you are still breathing. The knives and swords I saw among the traps were placed there by God. Meditation, spiritual reading, frequent confession, devotion to the Eucharist, devotion to Mary. These are the tools that cut you free. But you have to use them. You have to want to be free." The boys sat in silence for a long time after Don Bosco stopped talking. Some were crying, others stared at the floor. A few got up immediately and went to the chapel to pray. In the days that followed, dozens of boys came to Don Bosco for confession. They confessed sins they had been hiding for years. Some of them were sins Don Bosco had seen in the vision. He never told them which ones. He just listened, absolved them, told them to go and sin no more. One boy came to him privately. "Father, I think I was one of the boys you saw falling." Don Bosco looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I cannot tell you if you were or were not, but I can tell you this. You are here now. You are asking. That means you still have time. Do not waste it." The boy went to confession that night. If you found this story valuable, hit subscribe. Also drop a comment below with your city. Now back to what this vision tells us. 7 years before this vision, in 1865, Don Bosco announced to his boys that one of them would die soon. He knew because he'd seen it in a dream the night before. On March 16, 1865, a boy named Anthony Ferraris died after receiving the last sacraments. A witness named John Bosco, who helped Anthony and his mother during his final hours, swore a formal oath. He said, "Don Bosco told us many other dreams concerning oratory boys' deaths. We believed them to be true prophecies. We still do because unfailingly they came true. During the 7 years I lived at the oratory, not a boy died without Don Bosco predicting his death. We were also convinced that whoever died there under his care and assistance surely went to heaven. This pattern repeated for decades. Don Bosco would dream, he would see, he would warn. The boys listened because they knew he was not guessing. The vision of hell in 1868 was different. It was not just about one boy or one death. It was about the entire mechanism, the traps laid by the enemy, the progression of sin, the moment of no return. Pope Pius IX heard about Don Bosco's dreams and was so impressed he gave an order. "Write them down, do not keep them to yourself. The congregation and the rest of the church need them." Don Bosco obeyed. The dreams were compiled into 7 large volumes held in the Salesian archives. The hell vision alone runs over 20 pages in the original Italian transcript. Every detail is preserved. The inscriptions on the bronze doors, the temperature of the cave, the sound of the boys screaming, the way the fire glowed white instead of orange, the sensation of touching the wall. Scholars have debated for a century whether this was a dream or an actual mystical vision. Don Bosco himself refused to clarify. "Call it a dream or give it any other name," he said. "Call it what you wish." But his hand was burned. That part was not symbolic. The vision also reveals something about the nature of hell that most people miss. The boys Don Bosco saw were not there because they committed one massive sin. They were there because they kept choosing small sins and refusing to repent. The traps were thin, nearly invisible, easy to step into, but once caught, the pull was irresistible unless they grabbed the tools God provided. That is the part that haunts. Hell is not full of people who never heard about God. It is full of people who heard and chose otherwise. They were warned, they were given sacraments, they were shown mercy, and they said no. The guide in the vision made this explicit. These boys have been warned 1,000 times. They still choose to rush into the fire. Don Bosco spent the rest of his life building schools, homes, and churches to keep boys from that road. By the time he died on January 31st, 1888, the Salesian Society had founded 250 homes for boys containing 130,000 children. Over 6,000 of those boys became priests. The Salesians still exist today. They are the second largest religious order in the world. Every single one of them can trace their mission back to that 9-year-old boy in Becce who had a dream about wild children. And a voice that said, "With meekness and charity, you will conquer these, your friends." Don Bosco was beatified by Pope Pius XI on June 2nd, 1929. He was canonized by the same Pope on April 1st, 1934. His feast day is January 31st. He is the patron saint of youth and Christian education. But the vision of hell remains one of the most detailed accounts ever recorded by a Catholic saint. Doctors who examined Don Bosco in the days following the vision confirmed the burns on his hand. Father Joseph Pius Martin, who served as Don Bosco's secretary, wrote that the hand remained scarred for weeks. The blisters were real. The peeling skin was real. The boys who went to confession after hearing the vision were real too. Some of them lived long lives and became Salesian priests themselves. They told the story to their own students. One of those students was a boy named Michael Rua, who later became the second superior general of the Salesians. Rua documented everything he heard from Don Bosco, and those records are still preserved in Turin. The vision also contains a lesser-known detail that most summaries skip. After Don Bosco saw the boys falling into the white fire, the guide took him deeper into hell. They passed through more corridors, more rooms. Each one had a curtain. Behind each curtain was a different sin. One curtain was labeled the sixth commandment. The guide pointed to it and said, "Transgressions of this commandment caused the eternal ruin of many boys." Don Bosco asked why. The guide explained that many boys committed sins of impurity but did not confess them properly. Some said they fell twice when it was 5 times. Others committed the sin once in childhood and never confessed it out of shame. Still others confessed, but were not truly sorry or sincere in their resolve to avoid it in the future. Some spent their confession trying to deceive the priest instead of examining their conscience. Another curtain read, "Root of all evil." The guide asked Don Bosco what it meant. "Pride," he said, but the guide corrected him. "Generically, it is pride, but concretely, it is disobedience. Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise for this sin. Disobedience is the root of all evils." The guide lifted another veil. Behind it, Don Bosco saw boys he recognized from the oratory. They were in pain, burning, screaming. Above them was written, "Those who desire to become rich fall into temptation and into the snare of the devil." Don Bosco protested. "This does not apply to my boys. They are as poor as I am. We are not rich and do not want to be," the guide explained. For example, the hearts of some boys are attached to material objects so that this disordered affection distances them from God. It is not about money. It is about where their treasure is. The vision continued for what felt like hours, room after room, veil after veil, each one exposing a different category of sin and the boys trapped by it. Don Bosco recognized faces in every room, boys who were still alive but walking the road toward that final bronze door. When the guide finally let him out, Don Bosco was shaking. He begged to know what advice he should give his boys to safeguard them from such a tragedy. The guide's answer was simple. Keep telling them that by obeying God, the church, their parents, and their superiors, even in little things they will be saved. That was it. Obedience, not complex theology, not mystical practices, just obedience to the basic commands of God and the authorities he established. Don Bosco asked one more question. "Father, what about the boys who do not pray?" The guide's response was blunt. "Those who do not pray will be lost." Prayer was the difference. Not intelligence, not talent, not even good intentions. Prayer, talking to God, asking for help, begging for grace. The boys who prayed grabbed the knives and cut themselves free. The boys who did not pray kept walking into traps. When Don Bosco woke from the vision, he spent the entire next day pacing his room trying to decide if he should tell anyone. The physical pain in his hand was proof it was real. But would the boys believe him? Would they think he had gone mad? That night the figure appeared again. "Why do you not tell them?" Don Bosco asked what he should say. "Tell them what you have seen and heard." So he did. The impact was immediate. Confessions increased. Chapel attendance surged. Boys started carrying rosaries and asking for spiritual direction. The change lasted. It was not a temporary emotional spike. The boys who heard the vision in 1868 carried it with them for the rest of their lives. One detail stands out in all the records. Don Bosco never revealed which specific boys he saw in hell. He never named names. He never pointed fingers. He told the vision as a warning, not as an accusation. That restraint saved lives. If he had singled boys out publicly, they might have despaired. Instead, he gave them the tools and let them decide. The ones who wanted to be saved came to him privately. The ones who did not continued down the road. The hell vision also shaped how Don Bosco trained his priests. He told every Salesian seminarian that their primary job was not to teach math or carpentry. It was to save souls from that cave. Everything else was secondary. If a boy learned a trade but ended up in hell, the mission failed. This explains why Don Bosco was so insistent on frequent confession and communion. He had seen what happened when boys avoided the sacraments. He watched them slide into the fire one by one. He was not being overly pious or legalistic. He was being practical. The tools worked. The boys who used them survived. In his final years, Don Bosco's dreams became less frequent but more intense. He saw the future of the church. He saw wars. He saw the Salesian mission spreading across continents. But he never saw another vision as detailed as the one in 1868. Some think that was deliberate. One vision was enough. God showed him what he needed to see. Don Bosco spent the rest of his life acting on it. The last time Don Bosco spoke about the hell vision publicly was in 1886, 2 years before his death. He was weak, his voice was fading, but when a group of new seminarians asked him for advice, he told them the story one more time. Then he said this, "Never forget what I have told you. The boys you will work with are not just students. They are souls standing on that road. Some of them are already caught in traps. Your job is to hand them the knife. Do not assume they know how to use it. Show them. Stay with them. Cut them free if you have to, but do not let them slide past you into that abyss. The seminarians left that meeting in silence. 3 weeks later, one of them was assigned to a parish in southern Italy. He found a teenage boy who had been living on the streets for 2 years. The boy was addicted to theft and had stopped going to church. The seminarian remembered Don Bosco's words. He did not lecture the boy. He did not shame him. He just handed him a rosary and said, "Pray this once a day and come back tomorrow." The boy came back. Then he kept coming back. Within 6 months, he went to confession. Within a year, he entered the seminary himself. That boy eventually became a Salesian priest. He spent 40 years working with street children in Buenos Aires. He told the story of Don Bosco's hell vision to every boy he met. Some of them listened, some did not. But the ones who listened carried it forward. That is how a single night in 1868 echoes across generations. But here is the part no one talks about. The vision did not just affect the boys Don Bosco saw. It affected the boys he did not see. Because if Don Bosco could see some of them in hell, that meant others were not there. Some boys avoided the traps. Some grabbed the tools. Some made it. The vision was not just a warning. It was also a map. In 1876, 8 years after the hell vision, Don Bosco had another dream. This time, he saw heaven. His student Dominic Savio appeared and led him across a vast blue plain. Everything was light. Everything was peace. Dominic showed him thousands of boys dressed in white, boys who had died under Don Bosco's care, boys who made it. Don Bosco asked where they were. Dominic smiled. "You are in a place of happiness where all is beautiful and can be enjoyed." Is this heaven, then? No, whatever is here is of the earth, although improved beyond conception by the power of God. Dominic explained this was a place of natural happiness, but it paled compared to the sliver of heaven he was allowed to see next. The real heaven was beyond description. The boys in white were saved, but they were not yet in the fullness of glory. Don Bosco woke from that dream with tears streaming down his face. He immediately went to the chapel and prayed for 2 hours. Then he gathered the boys and told them what he saw. "If you could see what I saw tonight, you would never sin again." The boys asked what made the difference between the two visions. Why did some end up in the white fire and others in the blue plain? Don Bosco's answer was the same as before. Obedience, prayer, sacraments, devotion to Mary. It was not complicated. The tools were simple. The question was whether they used them. One boy raised his hand. "Father, how do we know if we are on the right road?" Don Bosco pointed to the tabernacle. "If you are here, you are on the right road. If you are avoiding here, you are on the wrong one." That exchange was recorded by Father Giovanni Bonetti in 1876 and preserved in the Salesian Biographical Memoirs, Volume 12, page 63. The hell vision remains controversial even within Catholic circles. Some theologians argue it should be understood as allegory. Others insist it was a literal mystical experience. The debate misses the point. Don Bosco burned his hand on a wall that should not exist. The blisters were real. The scar tissue was real. Whether he physically traveled to hell or whether God brought hell to him is irrelevant. What matters is that Don Bosco saw something true, and it changed everything. Pope Francis referenced Don Bosco's visions in a homily on January 31st, 2014. He said Don Bosco understood that the devil does not need spectacular sins to win souls. He just needs small compromises repeated over time. The traps are thin, nearly invisible, but they work. That is the legacy of the 1868 vision. Not fear, not manipulation, just clarity. Hell is real. The traps are everywhere. But the tools are also everywhere. And the choice belongs to each person. Don Bosco's hand healed, the boys grew up, the Salesians spread across the world. But the bronze doors remained, and the vision stands as proof that what happens after death is not abstract theology. It is documented by a man who touched the wall and carried the burns to prove it.